Imam Aḥmad and other religious scholars therefore believe that the acts of creatures are of two types: acts of worship considered as faith, which benefit one in the hereafter, or both in this life and the hereafter, and acts of manners, which benefit only in this life. As to worship, only such acts of worship will be accepted which are prescribed by Allah. As to the acts of manners, only such acts would be forbidden which have been declared so by Allah. Guided by this principle, such as innovated religious festivals and fairs are to be avoided in that they have assumed the form of a new faith in the mistaken belief of gaining nearness of Allah. Chapter Innovation. Innovations are always undesirable, though this point should be grasped as general rulings and principles of the religion. However, some people tend to categorize innovation under two heads, good and bad. In order to substantiate their claim, they refer to this remark of Umar about Tarawih prayer, how good this innovation is. Moreover, they cite various rituals which came to be practiced after the Prophet's death, yet they are not considered undesirable. On the contrary, in the light of consensus and reasoning, they are regarded as desirable practices. Some ignorant people have introduced many things and labeled these as good innovations. To regard something as a matter of consensus, which is widely practiced without seeking the opinion of all Muslims, and to endorse the same is commented upon thus in the Qur'an. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ إِلَى رَسُولِهِ قَالُوا حَسْبُنَا مَا وَجَدْنَا عَلَيْهِ آبَاءَنَا. And when it is said to them, come to what Allah has revealed and to the Messenger, they say, enough for us is that which we found our fathers following. Al-Ma'idah. This misconception is fairly common among those who hold a distinct position in society by dint of their learning or devotion to religious practices. They draw on such arguments which are not valid in matters of faith. There are many explicit statements in the fundamental source of Islam which condemn innovation and dismiss arguments advanced in support of good innovations. These arguments, either drawn from Sharia or are the disputation of such persons whom only the ignorant people can trust in them. As to the opponents, that they may take only the two positions. Either they should hold that once it is established that some innovations are good and others bad, the bad one is that which has been forbidden by Sharia. As to the innovations which Sharia is silent, they are not bad but may possibly be good. Or they should say that such and such innovations are good in view of such and such advantages, that is, they do not hold the faith that each innovation is error. Our stance is that it is reported in authentic hadith. شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل بدعة ضلالة. The worst deeds are innovation, each innovation is error. There are unmistakable statements of the Prophet ﷺ regarding innovations. It is therefore proper for anyone to reject hadith. One guilty of it is in serious error. The opponents may, however, argue that if something is endorsed by Sharia, it will not be regarded as innovation. Given this, a general principle, each innovation is error, will be followed without making any exception, or a practice of which sanctity is established will be taken as an exception. It is well known that the general principle is always applicable except in these exceptional cases. Otherwise, every innovation would be held as an error according to the general ruling. To those who believe that certain innovations are exceptions, the onus lies on them for producing sound argument in defense of innovations. Otherwise, every innovation would be held as an error according to the general rule. It should be realized that the arguments which exempt something from general principles should be based on Sharia. In other words, these should be drawn from the Qur'an, Sunnah, and consensus, whether directly or by implication. The views and practices of certain scholars or certain communities and persons cannot in any way supersede the Prophet's saying. Claim for consensus. As to those who believe that practice contrary to Sunnah have gained the consensus of the Muslim community and that the community let flourish and did not forbid them. It is a fallacious view, for there have been persons in each period who have opposed and forbidden practices which are contrary to Sunnah. If Muslims carry out certain practices at a single or many places, it cannot be taken as consensus that some groups practice a particular thing is not sound argument on this count. Most of the scholars did not regard the practice and views of the ulama of Medina in the days of Imam Malik anhum, as a clinching argument. Rather, they referred Sunnah. We know about their credentials. Given this, we cannot take the practice of certain scholars as a model who do so out of habit or because of compulsion by the general public, or out of conformity or under constraint of such ignorant but dominant people who do not possess any knowledge, nor do they have abilities of discernment. Rather, their faith in Allah and His Messenger is itself doubtful. Some scholars are now, no doubt, good people, but they seem to follow common practice without thinking, or they have been victims of some confusion. It can be held, although some of these people are good and may be graded as religious scholars, yet their conduct cannot be taken as model in matters of Sharia. Ulama are not in favor to cite these practices. The bitter truth is that ignorance is rampant. Majority of people are misled by such arguments which have no basis. What is most deplorable is that even those associated with religious knowledge have fallen prey to such misunderstanding. Sometimes certain points are adduced by persons of knowledge and faith. Nonetheless, their words and deeds do not carry any weight in matters of Sharia. They seem to be misguided in matters which have not drawn from Allah and His Messenger. They draw on Sharia argument only in order to silence their audience. Although it is not good practice for in such a debate only such arguments should be cited which are authentic, it is sheer hypocrisy that they refer to baseless principles and overstretch them in order to prove their points. It is not proper to isolate only such innovations as the target of hadith. Each innovation is error, of which prohibition is well known. Such a conduct amounts to toying with hadith. Sharia has already forbidden unbelief, transgression, and all misdeeds. Their prohibition is common knowledge. The above quoted hadith makes no reference to these evils. However, if anyone were to accept the view that only those things are forbidden which are explicitly forbidden in Sharia, irrespective of the fact whether those were practiced in the days of the Prophet or not, it would be distort the definition of innovation. In this case, both its absence and presence would make no difference. Rather, the prophetic statement, each innovation is error, would tend to mean that each practice of Arabs and non-Arabs is error. Obviously, it is misinterpretation of the text, and they may give rise to several problems, some of which are stated below. It makes the hadith meaningless. For if something has been already forbidden, its prohibition is an established fact. And if its prohibition is not there, it cannot be prohibited under the hadith. Each innovation is error. If the above definition of the hadith is accepted, in either case the above hadith appears pointless, whereas the Prophet, peace be upon him, used to recite this hadith in the Friday sermons, and it was considered as a comprehensive statement. Number two, it would render the expression innovation meaningless in that it would be applicable nowhere. Three, innovation is something general, whereas prohibition is an exception. Both of them are thus relative terms for being specific and general. Given this is a general rule in mentioned, whereas the intent is to consider only the exception without spelling it out, concealing what ought to be explained and elucidating only the hidden meaning amounts to fraud. Only an unscrupulous person can commit this. It cannot be accepted to the Prophet. If the Prophet's statement is in each innovation is error, and avoid inventing new things in matters of faith stand for things which are explicitly forbidden, it means that he failed to guide Muslims to follow the above quoted hadith. Number five, if the above hadith is specific to things which are explicitly forbidden, then the number of things which are forbidden is too less than that those of those which are not forbidden. As it is, a general statement cannot be made to indicate a very limited number of practices. It will be highly improper to do so. In the light of above considerations, it is clear that the opponent's viewpoint is baseless and cannot be held applicable to the hadith under discussion. The onus lies on those who try to make a certain point. They should prove that their position is in accordance with the intent of Sharia. Likewise, they should tell why they construe this particular hadith in an exceptional sense, whether the above accounts make it impossible to regard these as an exception. This was in respect to their first argument, a rejoinder to their second argument. Insofar as their second argument is concerned, it may be countered thus. Let us assume that the innovations are of two types, good and bad. Their assumption does not, however, make it compulsory that hadith is not a sound argument for condemning all acts of innovations. What can be said at most is that if an innovation is proved to be good, it will be treated as an exception. However, the fundamental principle remains intact that each innovation is an error. For responding to this question, we have already brought home the point that if an innovation is proved to be good, it is either not an innovation or is an exception to the general rule. It maintains the safeguards the position of hadith. Such a situation arises only when an innovation is proved to contain a goodness. However, regarding the matter which are considered good, but they are not actually so, and also regarding the matters which might be either good or bad, it is improper to advance them as argument. Regarding all of them, our stand is that if an innovation is proved to be something good, either it is not an innovation at all, or is an exception to the general rule. If it is goodness is not proved, it would continue to be governed by the general rule. It is each innovation is error. Whatever be the case, the import of hadith remains sound. No one is authorized to dismiss the Prophet's statement. Each innovation is error. It does not befit anyone to ignore such a comprehensive and all-embracing statement of the Prophet ﷺ, nor it is possible for anyone to reject its import. As to those who try to tone down the statement holding that each innovation is not error, it is tantamount to rebelling against the Prophet. For if the goodness of an act is proved, it should be held that a particular act is not innovation, hence it lies outside the range of the hadith. Or it may be considered that the practice is to be considered on exception in view of such and such evidence. The former position is a better, whereas the later is subject to question. For the Prophet's intention is clear in the hadith, and it is not permissible in any case to overlook his intention. Tarawih prayer. Tarawih prayer is not an innovation. That is Sunnah is evident from the Prophet's words and deeds. For he said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ فَرَضَ عَلَيْكُمْ صِيَامَ رَمَضَانَ وَسَنَنْتُ لَكُمْ قِيَامًا. Allah has made fasting in Ramadan obligatory and prayer therein is Sunnah. In the early part of Ramadan, the Prophet ﷺ led congregational Tarawih prayer 3 nights, and he repeated the same on the last nights of Ramadan, saying, إِنَّ الرَّجُلَ إِذَا صَلَّى مَعَ إِمَامِي حَتَّى يَنْصَرِفَ كُتِبَ لَهُ قِيَامُ اللَّيْلِ. When one prays behind Imam and stays till Imam finishes, he gets the reward for praying for the whole night. The above hadith is reported by many muhaddithin, and Imam Aḥmad has inferred from the same that it is better to offer Tarawih prayer in congregation than individually. This hadith obviously exhorts us to offer Tarawih prayer in congregation, hence it is a clear Sunnah. Moreover, the Prophet ﷺ did not object to the companions praying Tarawih in congregation. His silence and the continuance of the practice are in themselves a proof that is Sunnah. As to Umar's remark about Tarawih, that is good innovation, it leaves little room for the opponents to draw a fallacious conclusion. For if one other occasions a religious command is mentioned with reference to the statement of Umar or any other companion, the very same person will declare that his companion's statement is not a clinching argument. If this is the principle, Umar's statement which contravenes the Prophet's Sunnah cannot be a clinching argument. Moreover, those who regard a companion's statement as a sound basis do do concede the point that a statement which is contrary to hadith cannot be reckoned. In any case, it is not proper to cite a companion statement in opposition to hadith. This is no doubt true that if a companion statement is not objected to by anyone, it may be used by making an exception to the general principle of hadith. In the light of the above, what can be established at most is that a particular innovation can be proved good. However, it leaves out other innovations. We must reiterate the point that Umar branded Tarawih prayer as good innovation. He, however, used a literal expression, not Sharia one. It is common knowledge that innovation stands for such acts which are done without any precedence. In Sharia terminology, innovation signifies an act which does not have any base in Sharia. So if one practices an act in the light of the Prophet's conduct after his death and follows the same, for example, a practice initiated by Abu Bakr, issuing a book of charity, it may be literally described as innovation in that it did not have any precedence. Even Islam was described literally as an innovation. The representatives of the Quraysh at the court of Najash in Ethiopia, while opposing the Muslim migrants, said they have deviated from the faith of their ancestors, nor have they embraced the emperor's faith. Rather, they practice a new faith which is not known to anyone. However, an act which is endorsed by the Qur'an and Sunnah is not an innovation according to Sharia, though it may be literally considered as an innovation, for the literal meaning of the innovation is much more wide-ranging than its definition in Sharia. Obviously, in the Prophet's statement, each innovation is error. Innovation is not taken in its literal sense. It is not condemned an act which is done for the first time. For Islam itself, for the faith preached by earlier messenger, were new and unprecedented. On the contrary, the Prophet's reference is to such acts which are not prescribed by Sharia. As to Tarawih prayer, the companions of Prophet ﷺ used to offer in the Prophet's life, both collectively and individually, on the third or fourth night, while the companions had assembled, the Prophet ﷺ told them, إنه لم يمنعني أن أخرج إليكم إلا كراهة أي يفرض عليكم فصلوا في بيوتكم فإن أفضل الصلاة للمرأة في بيتي إلى مكتوبة. I did not deliberately come out of the prayer lest it may become compulsory for you. You should offer it at home. For except the obligatory prayer, the best prayer is the one which is offered at home. When reflecting over the above report, it becomes clear that the Prophet ﷺ deliberately abstained himself lest Tarawih prayer might become compulsory. Offering prayer was still a duty. Had the Prophet ﷺ not apprehended that it become compulsory, he would have certainly come out. During this caliphate, Umar assembled the Muslims to offer Tarawih prayer in congregation and arranged for lighting the mosque. This particular form of prayer, it is offering it behind the Imam and making arrangements for lighting where the practice is not followed by the companions at an earlier date. Hence, these were named as an innovation. This could be the only literal expression for these practices. However, these practices were not innovation according to Sharia, for such a practice is a virtuous act in the light of Sunnah. It was not practiced continuously for the fear it might become compulsory after the Prophet's death. There was no such apprehension, hence there was no obstacle to continue this practice on a regular basis. Acts which are not innovations. There are many acts which cannot be described as innovation. For example, the collection of the Qur'an. The Qur'an was not compiled in the days of Prophet ﷺ, for the process of revelation was on and commands were subject to change by Allah. Had the Qur'an been collected in a book form, then it would have been difficult to incorporate changes. However, after the Prophet's death, the process of revelation ended and Sharia was established as the Qur'an was collected. Technically, this act of collection was an innovation. It was not, however, an innovation in terms of Sharia. On the contrary, it was in accordance with the Sunnah. Same holds true of Umar's expulsion of Jews of Khaybar and Christians of Najran from Arab. The Prophet ﷺ had instructed him to do the same while he was on his deathbed. Abu Bakr could not implement it in view of his preoccupation with the battles against the Persian, Romans, and the apostates. As soon as Umar found an opportunity after assuming office, he implemented the Prophet's directive. Once again, Umar's acts may be described literally as innovations. Even the Jews had raised the same point of telling Umar, "You expelled us while the Prophet had let us stay." In Ali's days, they once again made an appeal on the same ground, seeking permission to return, adding that they had a document written in Ali's own hand. However, Ali too refused them. Refused them permission, although Umar's action happened at a date after the Prophet's death. It being in consonance with the Prophet's directive cannot be branded as innovation. Another instance is of Abu Bakr declaring a war against those who refuse to pay zakah. There are many other instances illustrating the same point. The above account should, however, suffice. The underlying principle. Generally speaking, people invent things, regard them as useful. If new things are harmful, these would never gain currency. In the light of this principle, let us study the situation which prompts a Muslim to consider certain things as useful. If such a situation arose after the Prophet's death and there is no prohibition on the Prophet's part, this practice may be adopted. Likewise, necessity of something was realized in the Prophet's day, yet he did not do it in the view of certain hindrance, which, however, moved after his death. Then it is legal to be adopted. Moreover, if there is some issue behind which there is no valid reason, or the reason is a product of misdeeds of the people, it is not proper to adopt it. If some action was needed in the Prophet's day, yet he did not do it, it should be realized that he did not recognize its need. Such an action is therefore deprived of any usefulness, but the necessity of some acts was released after the Prophet's death, and the reason behind it is not the result of misdeeds of the people, then this act may consist usefulness. Two viewpoints of jurisprudence. Muslim jurisprudence have two viewpoints on this issue. According to the one group, which is not prohibited is permissible. For the later group, only that is permissible which is commanded. The later group is subdivided into schools of thoughts. For one, such things are permissible which are born out of the Prophet's word, deed, or affirmation. This group does not recognize the principle of analogy, for other commands may be sanctioned by the Prophet's word or by its import. They are those who follow the principle of analogy. Worldly ulama and misguided Sufis, if an action was needed in the Prophet's day, yet he did not do it, it means the Prophet ﷺ did not recognize its need. To hold such an act as permissible account to tampering with the religion of Allah. Only the misguided ruler or the audacious ulama and saints could dare do so. Those liable to committing mistakes in interpretation may also be guilty of the same. These statements of the Prophet ﷺ is recorded on the authority of many companions. إن أخوف ما أخاف عليكم زلة العالم أو جدال منافق بالقرآن وأئمة مضلون. What I fear most regarding you is the mistakes committed by ulama, the disputation of hypocrites through Qur'an and the misguided leaders. A clinching argument. An instance in this context is adhan in Eid prayers. This practice was invented by a certain rule but was resented by the Muslims. They objected to it on the ground that it was an innovation. Otherwise, they would have used the pretext that adhan is a form of remembering of Allah and the call to the Muslims to worship Allah. It could be easily argued that adhan is derived from the Quranic verses which exhort us to remember Allah and to invite others to Allah. The analogy to adhan in Friday prayer could also be advanced. It is evident that the arguments advanced in favor of adhan for Eid prayers are stronger than those advancing in favor of other innovations. In spite of this, the adhan for Eid prayers are still in innovation, in that the necessity which needs it today did also exist in the Prophet's day, and there was nothing to stop it, yet the Prophet ﷺ did not follow this practice. He did command to announce adhan and Friday prayer, however, he offered Eid prayers without adhan and iqamah. However, they offered Eid prayers without adhan and iqamah, for both his practices are, and his abandoning of certain action are sunnah. His abandoning of adhan and Eid prayer is sunnah. Now, it is not permissible for anyone to alter his way. Sorry. Any tampering on this count may be likened to adding the number of rak'ah in the 5 daily prayers. That is, one offers 5 rak'ahs instead of the prescribed 4 in Dhuhr prayer, on the ground that prayer is a virtuous act and offering more rak'ah is an act of greater virtue. Likewise, a particular place is designated for remembering Allah and is paraded as a good innovation. The practice, however, undesirable for being an innovation. We know well that each innovation is error. We are sure that this would lead to error even before its harm becomes manifest. Had it been a good practice, it would have been prescribed as or recommended. No matter how hard the practitioners of innovation may try, their efforts cannot be acceptable, for the need for such action existed in the Prophet's day, yet he did not follow or prescribe that practice. His avoidance of the practice is sunnah, and its weighty argument against all the points advanced in its defense. Acts of innovation. Let us now turn to such acts of innovation which have been invented by people owing to their own misinterpretations. An example is the delivering of a sermon before Eid prayer. This innovation was practiced by certain rulers, which was objected by Muslims. In their defense, they argued that since those praying dispersed after the prayers and did not listen to the sermon, perhaps they used to stay in the Prophet's day. This argument is not valid enough to justify this innovation, for the need for such an action was caused by the same ruler. The Prophet ﷺ used to deliver sermon. His primary concern was the welfare and guidance of Muslims, whereas the ruler was interested only in his own glory and power. The ruler's misdeeds could not justify another misdeed. Instead of introducing innovation, the best way for these rulers was to mend their ways to follow Sunnah. Then they would have monitored people's response as to whether they waited for the sermon or not. Had they not waited for their sermon, Allah would have taken them to task for not listening to the sermon.